Welcome back to the Behind the Net podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matthew, and joined with me today is my co-host, Michael.
Hey guys, how's it going? As you can probably tell by the title of the episode and the guest that we have on, this is a very important episode. And we just finished recording a very important discussion with Omar and Erica, and I think it was a very impactful discussion, and I really hope you stick around for it because I think it's a very important listen.
100%. And I mean, just to reiterate your point that it's an important episode, of course, a couple months ago, we had a very important episode with Peter, Ash, and Tiffany Mongu on here talking about the racial issues we experience in the world today, and we have experienced for many, many years in the history of our world, really. And just we wanted to continue that conversation because that conversation should always be continuing, and it doesn't stop. But today we wanted to focus in, obviously, with sports restarting this week. We want to talk about that and how things have been going in the major leagues right now in relation to that. So a big episode coming your way, a very important episode, and I hope you guys listen attentively. And hopefully we want this podcast to be something that a lot of people can use as a tool to educate themselves. But before we get into that bulk of the episode, we just want to go over this week in sports news super quickly in the big three sports leagues. Again, the main point of this episode is the discussion that is coming up soon, but we just want to go over it quickly before that. So, of course, first, let's just tackle the Toronto Maple Leafs. They started their series with the Columbus Blue Jackets. It's currently tied 1-1. We are recording this on Thursday, so it's a Leafs game day. But at the end of game 2, Jake Muzzin got injured. It looked like a kind of obviously a fluke, awkward incident that kind of happened, of course, but very scary nonetheless. And of course, we know that he will be out for the remainder of the series. So, Michael, I just want to know your thoughts on that. And then should the Leafs go with Marinson or Sandin?
Well, first of all, it was definitely a really rough injury, and it leaves a huge hole in the Leafs back end. No, you can't slice it any other way. But if you're going to be picking between the two players on the Leafs blue line, who they should have gone with, I mean, obviously, it looks like they're going to side with Marincin. I would have preferred Sandin because he has more youth, like jump to his game, and I think he'd definitely value from the experience in the playoffs. But I can understand where Keefe's coming from with picking Marincin because Marincin does play the penalty kill pretty well. He's got the good size to do it there, and I think when we consider that the Leafs took 3 penalties in Game 2, and all 3 of them were killed off in part because of Jake Muzzin's play, I can understand why Keefe would feel comfortable going with Marincin in this case.
I'm completely with you there. I think it's a good. I mean, obviously, an injury is a bad problem to have, but I think it's a good problem that you have 2 serviceable defensemen that can be called up at any time. I'm with you that I think I would like to see Sandin called up, but I think Marincin is the smart choice right now for Keefe going into the rest of the series. But we'll have to see how the Leafs do, of course, with Muzzin out tonight in Game 3. Moving on to the Toronto Raptors, a whole different story kind of there. First, I want to give a huge shout out to the Toronto Raptors who've been, they've been unrelentless with their support for Black Lives Matter and support for promoting racial equality. And, all the players I've seen every single interview, they use the time to promote and make sure people are aware of the issues and really just trying to keep the conversation going and keep the focus on what really matters. Of course, sports is starting back up, but these are the things we really should be talking about and not stop talking about. So huge shout out to the Raptors. They're kneeling, every single one of them, for both anthems, and it's just great to see.
Absolutely, agreed.
And yeah, there's not much I want to say about the Toronto Raptors though in terms of play, because they are 3-0 right now, and they've just been playing with that championship mentality, and I love it so much. And really, I just want to know, what are your thoughts on them? I just quickly want to give a couple of shout outs to the players who I've been really impressed by. specifically Kyle Lowry and OG
Yep.
Anunoby and Fred VanVleet, who've been putting on huge shows and playing great these last few games.
I absolutely agree with you there, man. I've been really impressed with what I'm seeing from the Raptors. They've been playing exceptional basketball these first 3 games, and even during the scrimmages, they've been playing really well. What is it? A 3-game winning streak right now for them?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think they really have. I think it's really the early signs are showing that they're playing with that championship mentality, like you said. And I think really all they can really do at this point is just to really lock down and fine tune their defensive game, because in the playoffs, and especially last year, that was what they were defined by, and they need to be defined by that again this year, because like the San Antonio Spurs of the past era, while they don't have any like major names, I mean obviously Tim Duncan was a big name, they really played well team wise, and their team defense was a huge factor in that. I think the Raptors really need to focus on improving that style of play, because that's what's going to help them go far in these playoffs, and that's what's going to help them try and go for a round of a second championship, because I think they have all the pieces needed to do it again.
Exactly, and shout out to Nick Nurse, of course, my pick for Coach of the Year.
Mine too.
Who I really think the Raptors have truly been successful because of his ability to adapt to so many different situations thrown at them, every single different team that they've faced. But yeah, and last but not least, I just want to talk about Pascal Siakam. He's had kind of, in his standards, of course, of an NBA All-Star, a slower, approach to the bubble, or start to the bubble, because of, I guess, being the number one option. We are holding him to a kind of a higher standard there, but Raptors fans, don't doubt him, because he has been playing really well regardless. And either way, the fact that someone is able to step up when someone, takes a step back and on the team is why the Raptors are successful right now.
Absolutely agree. I guess before we go into our big discussion, I want to quickly touch on the Toronto Blue Jays, who are finally back from their short pause due to outbreaks of COVID-19 with the Philadelphia Phillies and the Miami Marlins and a bunch of other teams. And that's what was causing them to stay in Washington for a couple days. They just played 2 games against the Atlanta Braves, one that they lost 10-1, another yesterday that they won 2-1. And I guess we were talking about this with Ian Hunter when the season just started. We were hoping to see some progression. There was potential for this team to make a run, but I think what we're seeing right now is inconsistent play. So I guess what I want to ask you is, like, what do you hope this Blue Jays team can accomplish based on what we've been seeing so far, and if what is their potential?
In terms of potential, we spoke about this last episode with Ian Hunter. It would be nice for them to make the playoffs, and I definitely think, given the circumstances of this season, it's still a possibility. It's still very much a possibility, but realistically, I don't think we should try to expect too much from these Blue Jays. I think going into the season, the main goal was to improve from last season, as we are seeing the Blue Jays being a rebuilding team right now. They just need to take that next step forward and then slowly towards a playoff spot. And it's really hard this season because, as we said last episode, you really need to hit the ground running in this shortened season to really even make the playoffs. And I think struggling in the beginning is not going to help the Blue Jays' case. And their inconsistency, of course, will not help their case of making the playoffs. So I wouldn't get my hopes up in terms of the Blue Jays making the playoffs, but I definitely think they have the potential to make it this season. But I'm just saying I don't want to expect anything from them other than the fact that to improve from last season.
Absolutely agree with all that. And I think that this Blue Jays team does have potential in a couple years' time, but we're not at that stage yet where they can realistically challenge for a playoff spot. We're still a ways away, and that's okay. They still have a ways to go, but they're in the right direction. At the very least, they're going to be more interesting to watch.
100%. I completely agree with that. And with that, let's go into the main discussion of this episode. Of course, we have TicTacTOmar, Omar, who we've had on this podcast previously, along with Erica Ayala, who we've also had on this podcast recently. And it's just it's such a great discussion, and I really hope a lot of people use it as a tool to educate themselves and also just to learn a lot about, the struggles that the Black community and people of color and of course Indigenous communities are facing during this time, specifically in sports. So let's get into that discussion right now.
And we're back. We have a very special episode for the podcast today. We have seen the racism that's been apparent in our world over the last few months and for many, many years historically before that. Today, we really wanted to talk about the push for anti-racism in sports and the support for the Black community. This week, the NBA and NHL both restarted their seasons officially. However, it's been apparent that one league has been taking a much different approach to tackling anti-racism and social justice than the other league. Today, we want to talk about the issues apparent in sports and try to use this podcast as a tool to learn more.
So today, we're very pleased to be joined by Erica Ayala, a color analyst for the Boston Pride and Connecticut Whale. And you can find those games on the NWHL on Twitch. She's also a freelance sports writer who has had her work appear on sites like The Athletic, Deadspin, and The Guardian. She has a passion for covering professional women's sports beyond just hockey, including basketball and soccer, and she is outspoken through her work about racial equality and in diversifying sports.
We're also pleased to be joined by Omar, who you might know on Twitter as TicTacTOmar, a GIF maker and writer for Pension Plan Puppets, who penned an amazing piece 2 months ago called Words from a Black Blogger, a dark past with hope for a brighter future, that details the need for action in hockey. And we need to create a discussion here that can really help educate a lot of people who aren't aware why there's such a need for change in action in sports, especially hockey. So welcome to the show, Omar and Erica. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm glad to be back and definitely excited to offer my voice to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. It's always a blast talking to you guys, and it's such a big topic that definitely needs to be talked about even more and further as we're seeing lack of action and complacency from the NHL, and even just other minds that are in the world right now. And obviously it's great, also great to talk to Erica. I've seen a lot of her stuff on social media and stuff, so it's actually pretty cool to talk to her and not just hear her voice through YouTube and stuff like that, because she does that. So it's gonna be blast. It's gonna be fun.
Awesome. And yeah, for sure, we definitely wanted to create an open discussion, basically, to hopefully we hope this podcast can be used as a tool for, a lot of people who might not, completely understand the issues that are apparent, or even why it might overlap into sports. And we just hope that this would be, something that they can hear and learn more. But before we get into, I guess, the bulk of the conversation, how are you guys doing today, and how's your weeks going?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride here as a women's sports writer. We had the Challenge Cup for women's soccer and the WNBA. I think one of my colleagues was saying, as of yesterday, we have 3 games a day for the next 12 days straight. So it's great to have sports back, but man, I'm sure the athletes, as well as all of us writing about the sports, are really feeling this fast and furious schedule we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to pony off that, the NHL is in full blast right now. Matthew, Michael, you guys write for your respective sites. You probably know all the stuff that's going on. There's this maximum chaos. Last night, Chicago is up in the game. Edmonton's up in the game, and then Chicago comes back, scores a pair of goals, one off Ethan Bear. Connor McDavid, swears, so he obviously doesn't care. He has no attitude, as Adrian Dater said. But it's crazy. Pittsburgh lost. Montreal's up 2-1 in the series. So and now we're going to another day of like literally 12 hours of hockey content. So sports wise, it's been wild. It's been a blast to watch. And the NHL is definitely delivering on all the content we've been missing out on for the last couple of months.
Yeah, just hearing that, it's like NCAA March Madness, but for all of the pro
Yeah.
sports at the same time.
Yeah.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
like a sports fan's dream. Like you could turn on like the TV like at any time of the day and catch like at least minimum like 2 to 3 games on. Like you could just take your pick.
I saw I don't know if it was either the Toronto hub or the Edmonton hub, but on the Jumbotron after a game, you know, like after when you're at the actual game, it'll say like, you know, like have a nice night, you know, enjoy your ride, like be safe or whatever. But on the Jumbotron it said please safely exit from your off of your couch, and I was like, that was pretty funny.
they're pulling out the good jokes, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, okay, that's funny.
That's good.
For sure.
And obviously, yeah, sports is back. It's really exciting to just be able to have some sense of normalcy. That's awesome. But I think one thing we've been noticing in a lot of sports is that we've been seeing, especially in the NBA and MLB, there's been a lot of kneeling, and that we haven't really seen much of that. Oh, and the WNBA too. Just want to add that as well. But in hockey, we haven't really seen that much of it. So to just get to the meat of things, for those who don't fully understand or may not know, what is the significance of seeing athletes kneeling during anthems, and why does it mean a lot to the Black community?
Yeah, that's a question that for me, my answer certainly has evolved. But to start, and I'm glad that you mentioned the WNBA, because for the WNBA, that's a league that's made up of 80% Black women, including shout out to Kia Nurse. So who obviously plays for the Canadian national team. Bridget Carlton had a great game yesterday too. Anyway, so in 2016, there was another man from Minnesota who was fatally shot by police, Philando Castile. There was also, because of that shooting in Dallas and some other uprisings that happened, and 5 police officers in Dallas were killed. And so the Minnesota Lynx team decided to wear shirts that said on the front, black shirts, white writing, change starts with us. And on the back, they had Dallas 5, Philando Castile, and then, some other messaging and words that they did. From there, that sparked other teams to also do some of that, which included warm-up T-shirts, but also included some players kneeling. And then, I guess it was about 2017. So this is leading into, another football season. We see Colin Kaepernick use his platform to talk about police brutality. And he began sitting during the national anthem. And then after having a conversation with, I believe it was a United States Army veteran, opted to, instead of sit for the national anthem, to kneel. And now kneeling from that moment of Colin Kaepernick wanting to just really separate himself from a moment in sports, especially in the United States, that means a lot about nationalism and the pride and the values that Americans are able to spout, but that maybe we're not maybe in my opinion, not even close to maybe, that we are not living by. And that as a world, honestly, we are not recognizing humanity in others. And unfortunately, that comes at the lives of Black bodies. And so we see kneeling now has become synonymous with things like Black Lives Matter, things like protesting police brutality, things like, protesting a lot of things that put, again, Black and brown bodies at risk, at harm, and are a part of the racism that exists that allows those things to happen with impunity. And so that's kind of what we're seeing play out now, or that I should say that's the history. But Omar, I mean, I read your piece, and I would love to know kind of what your thoughts are on all of that right now as we sit in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Erica, you nailed like the main points on the head there. I think for me, witnessing it, because I live in Canada, right? And I'm not, and this is not to say that racism does not exist in Canada. That's objectively false. Through my years of education, especially in post-secondary education, I've learned a lot that was hidden from from me, from people who look like me, black faces, black people, about the history that Canada was built on. And this isn't only about black people. We can also talk about indigenous lives and what they went through. So for me, when it comes to the kneeling, I think it's really difficult to stand for the national anthem when you actually take in its lyrics. And there's one lyric that always sticks out to me every single time I watch a game, and I have like a little moment of dissonance where I'm taking in the environment of the game. I'm watching everyone stand and listen to the anthem, and then I hear this line, and then my conscience kind of just splits, and then I think about all the things that are happening in the real world. And that line is "for the land of the free." And generally people like to stretch out that line because it's a nice, like, I don't know, an enunciating line where you get your vibrato and stuff, and usually you'll hear people in the crowd scream something, like go Leafs or something like that, regardless of where you're from. And so that line always sticks out to me because I split and I think, for the land of the free. And then you think about all the things that are happening where black people, black faces, black lives do not matter. You walk outside and you're literally judged and you're hated because of the color of your skin. How is this land free? So it's those type of things that I guess encompass my thought process, and which I think encompass a lot of the people's thought process who do decide to kneel, in that we're standing for this country, we're standing for this body, I guess, that is trying to speak certain things, just trying to spread a certain message that just isn't true. It's not. And social media has actually made people more privy to what's going on now, because the things that are happening now, as tragic as they are, I think it'd be wrong and a little foolish to assume that they just started happening now. Right. They've always been happening. We're just seeing it. So the George Floyds of the world, the Breonna Taylors of the world, they've been happening from the get-go. We're just now seeing it because of social media, because people are putting this out so everyone can be like, hey, this is what we're talking about. So when it's brought up in conversation, you can't say, oh no, it's just twisted, it's a different side of the story. Oh, maybe if he just complied and listened to what the officer was saying, nothing would happen. Well, here's the proof, man. Here's the proof that regardless of what happens, just because of the color of your skin, you're seen as a threat. You're killed just because of what you look like. And there's countless of examples, right? The Central Park incident where that woman basically called the cops and said there was a black man harassing me in the park. That's a death sentence. That is a death sentence. And that's what people need to understand. There are certain things that are coming out now with all these movements, and it's the kneeling, the Colin Kaepernick kneeling, and players kneeling are definitely triggering them, but there needs to be more, and that's why all these movements and all these I guess I don't know, I guess words and actions and what we want from these people who have these platforms. That's what we need them to start talking about. But here's the thing, and this is what ties into what I wrote on Pension Plan Puppets, is that words are the first step. Acknowledging the problem is the first step, but that doesn't mean it's solved. And I think that's a big problem what the NHL is facing right now, is because they've done enough, in air quotes. They put up their hashtag We Skate for Equality. They have their videos, their pregame things, and it's like they're checking off boxes off a list, and that's not the case. That's not what it's about. It's not about checking off boxes. It's about acknowledging what's going on and actually doing confound things to change the problem, because you have people in your league who are saying you are not doing enough. That's what needs to be the most important. They should be literally taking what Evander Kane's been saying and putting it in a gold plaque, because you're doing things and you think it's enough, but you have a black star in your league who's saying you are not doing enough. And the NHL and its players are proving time and time again that they are not doing enough. And sadly, there have been a whole bunch of examples over the last 2 days, I'd say. I don't know if you want to get into them now, but yeah, the NHL is not doing enough. And for anyone who questions, or who wants to go on who sees the NHL tweeting Matt Dumbo raising his fist, Ryan Reeves, Tyler Sagan, Robin Leonard, and Jason Dickinson kneeling, and then wants to tweet, "Oh, now I'm done with the sport." Okay, cool. Because there will be others who will come into this sport who were not welcome before, who may feel welcome now. But again, just because these initial things are happening does not mean the NHL is done. It has to be a movement, not a moment.
I really want to just highlight what you're saying right there, Omar. And there was someone in the WNBA who did an interview with one of our young reporters, and Diamond DeShields is the basketball player. And she said, and it was emphasized by Pepper Persley, that Black Lives Matter is the minimum. It's the minimum.
Absolutely.
Saying that Black Lives Matter, believing that Black Lives Matter is literally the minimum. And we as a society are and those who are in the movement, it feels like pulling teeth to get others to recognize, again, the humanity that comes within that statement, because there is this fear of I think it's a fear that is wrapped in conversation around being called a racist, which is really something. You are more fearful of being called a racist than actual racism existing. You think that saying Black Lives Matter is like the biggest step you can take, as opposed to putting in policies that ensure that law enforcement cannot kill with impunity, regardless of skin color, but particularly Black bodies. And so I loved that you said that about the NHL. I think that this conversation in sports is really sometimes kind of trippy when I start having conversations with advocates, because sports or corporate, corporations are really looking for, trophies or gold stars or, cookies for saying Black Lives Matter, when it really is the minimum. It's quite literally the least you can do is to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to jump off, not really jump off, just to connect points here, there's it all falls down to this. If you're not part of the justice, you're part of the problem. Yep. That's it. Flat out. Right. And we've seen that. We've seen that firsthand. If anyone wants an example, I'll give you an example. Okay. So, the NHL, they're starting their exhibition games. They're doing their whole, hey, let's all players, we'll stand on the line, but we won't stand with our teammates. We'll mix and match up a little bit just to show that, hey, we're all united in the fight against racism. That's great. That's cool. But what are you fighting exactly? Oh, well, we skate for equality. Okay, but what are you fighting exactly? We're standing for equality. We're standing for racial injustice. Okay, but what are you fighting for? The NHL, until just recently, refused to take a legitimate stance. And what happened? We had a certain individual quote tweet the NHL and said, "Great job. You're standing for the anthem." Now, a lot of people, and myself included, I was disgusted when I saw that, right? Because if anything, that just took everything that I wrote in that article and just flushed it down the toilet. Because literally, like, there was a portion where I'm like, why do I watch this sport? Why do I support this sport? Why do I cheer for this sport? Who obviously, and hey, maybe it's not true, but from from their lack of inactivity, who obviously do not care. Because now you have a person who is bringing a group of people who think a certain way to your sport and saying, hey, this is the beacon of how sports should be. It's a great message, right? So, and that's the thing. You can't do both. You can't. And okay, here's the analogy for the NHL. You can't straddle both sides of the blue line. And at some point, either you have to go into the offensive zone or stay into the neutral zone. Which side are you going to be on? And all these comments from players who are trying to justify why they're not doing anything, it just makes me even more and more upset. And it's just constant examples of complacency and how you literally just don't, like, you say you want to do all these things. You say that Black Lives Matter. You say that you want to fight against social injustice. But then when push comes to shove, you actually do not want to do anything. And I think that's a problem with hockey culture as a whole. Because as a whole, what's the one thing that we notice about hockey culture? You're a team. It's about the logo on the front. It's not about the individual. That's why players get torn to shreds when they share any sense of individuality or personality, right? So, and what is kneeling during the anthem? That's standing out and saying, "Hey, I'm doing this," but that goes against hockey culture, and that's what Evander Kane, Wayne Simmons, Nazem Kadri, Joel Ward. That's what they're trying to say is the problem. Akeem Aliu as well. That's what the problem is that in hockey culture, it's drilled into you as a kid to not stand out and to just be part of the status quo, to do what everyone else is doing. And it's not enough. When it comes to things like this, it's not enough. So I'm just gonna read something that I read on Twitter yesterday. Sarah Siv. It was a quote from Jacob Slavin. They asked if the Carolina Hurricanes ever considered doing more than linking arms for Black Lives Matter. This is a part of what Jacob Slavin said. He said, I think we came to a conclusion that we didn't want to do anything more. Jonathan Isaac, the basketball player, said kneeling and supporting Black lives don't really go hand in hand. If you look back at why Kaepernick kneeled in the first place, it was to get the conversation started. It's being had now.
Yeah, and I struggle with that kneeling in hockey in general, because I have the distinct privilege of covering the national or the Women's National Basketball Association, the WNBA. And I mean, these women are moving the conversation leaps and bounds
Absolutely
ahead of anyone. And so, but I also cover hockey, which I think is really struggling to have a full understanding of why their support is important, and the ways to do that, because again, they're not acknowledging at the very foundation that Black Lives Matter, because of the conversation that they assume is associated with that, which it could be a whole podcast in of itself. But that individuality, but we ask hockey players to promote, standing up for hockey is for everyone. We encourage hockey players to stand up and celebrate pride. I'm just a little bit confused because the messaging is confusing. When is it okay to acknowledge humanity and when is it not? And in the WNBA, because again, they were kneeling before Kaepernick, the conversation, again, they don't need that kneeling. They don't need that conversation starter. Do I think that hockey does? I get why people think hockey needs that, but it goes back, Omar, to something that you said. Hockey shouldn't need to see folks kneeling to listen to their own players. If they don't want folks kneeling or if they don't want to have the conversation, then listen to your own players and what they're saying. I'm so fatigued by the conversation that is having Black people prove racism, as opposed to helping Black people fight racism. And the burden of proof is outrageous. And if it takes kneeling or raising a fist to have that conversation in hockey, then I understand why it's needed. But I'm more drawn to what the Hurricanes have recently announced and continue to announce. Even I just got an alert a little while ago. I'm more interested, I should say, more concerned with and interested in what the NHL is going to do beyond Willie O'Ree, or showing a documentary again where they could listen to their players, Soul on Ice, or having a podcast now, Soul on Ice, as part of NHL. All of those things are a part of it, uplifting and acknowledging, as again in the case of or even the Capitals, excuse me. I think I said that. Well, the Hurricanes have also announced something, but the Capitals is what I was thinking about. And they now have a dedicated space on their webpage to acknowledge Black players that have come through their system. And a part of me was like, oh, this is dope. You know, as a hockey fan, I could go to one spot to get what I need. Like, that's what especially in the NHL, because I watch hockey in other spaces more than the NHL. So I'm like, okay, cool. And then I started thinking, and I got really sad about thinking about the circumstances and the literal lives that have been lost for an NHL team to even think to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, I feel like I'm going around and jumping into a lot of places, but that's how it feels to be Black. And then I'm adding that I'm a Black woman in a hockey space. And the constant need to acknowledge my presence as real, and also have to defend my right to be a hockey fan, defend my right of inquiring about hockey, and to defend my belief, my strong belief, that acknowledging and recognizing Black players and women in the space is not only the right thing to do, but to not do it is to disrespect the game of hockey itself.
Yep.
And so do I want hockey players to kneel? I don't need that from hockey. I don't need kneeling from hockey. I need every team to do what the Capitals did and acknowledge their Black players. I need teams to do what, even now we have a name, the Seattle Kraken. They have Black Lives Matter on their website. The Canes, I mentioned earlier, have done that. That's what I need from hockey, is the minimum of saying Black Lives Matter and then moving that to action. You love talking about Fort DuPont. You love talking about Willie O'Ree. You know, you love talking about ice hockey in Harlem. Do you love it because it makes you look good, or do you love it because you love the people that they are, Black hockey fans, Black hockey players? I'm concerned that, again, this is more of a corporate thing than actual change. And there's certain teams that are showing some light in the direction of this being, you know, not just a moment, a movement. I think, Omar, you said that earlier, but it's not quite to the standard that I think is even a minimum standard at this point, because again, hockey should know better by now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I'm laughing. I'm laughing at what you said there, Erica, but like, yeah. I mean, yeah. Hockey should know better than now. You know, even if, yeah, sure, there's a lower percentage of Black people who have played in the NHL, they should still know better at this point. So what does that tell me? That tells me that they actually, in the past, right now is debatable, but in the past, they've never cared.
Right.
You know, and you hear these stories. You hear these stories countless times. Devontae Smith-Pelly was in the penalty box when he was facing the Chicago Blackhawks, and fans were chanting basketball at him. Wayne Simmons, during a preseason game in London, Ontario, was taking a penalty shot, and a banana was thrown on the ice.
You know, and
you know what I mean? Yeah.
it's just wild because I'm listening to what you're saying and I read what you wrote. And again, it's just like this constant having to prove. It's like you should know better by now. Let's bring this to sports, right? We're all sports fans. We're all hockey fans here. If you're an athlete and you run up penalties, that is going to impact how you are utilized, how you are seen in the game. Hockey actually might not be the greatest sport to use this in, but anyway, the point is, if you're too aggressive, you have too many fouls, too many penalties, at some point in time, people are going to wonder if it's are you worth all of those penalties, right? Is your game good enough to stay on a team when you're racking up penalty after penalty after penalty? And I think that's where hockey is finding itself. Are your efforts good enough? Again and again and again, we've given you penalty after penalty after penalty for not acknowledging what your Black players, what your Black fans are telling you, what your Indigenous players, your Indigenous fans are telling you, what women in hockey are telling you. How many times is enough for us to show you that this is a problem? Before we're out, we dip. And so that's language that I believe the NHL knows. If you don't want your bottom line to be impacted, you need to do the right thing because you're racking up penalty after penalty after penalty. And one day you're going to get cut. Like that's how it goes. That's how it goes in any business and any sport and any profession. And for some reason, sports leagues don't like being held to the standards and the morals, right? That they ask everyone to believe in.
For sure.
Yep. And the thing that's crazy too is that the NHL as a whole, and we criticize them for doing this all the time, but I think it's actually pretty ironic that not really praise. I'm gonna bring this up now. Is that the NHL never panders to its own fans. It's always focusing on how to bring in new people. New faces. So it's like, hey, we'll change the All-Star game up a little bit and we'll make the puck glow and we'll have this little competition where the players in the stand because the fans will like it and it'll bring in more fans and other fans will be like, oh my god, look what the NHL is doing. You need to watch this. And they always focus on bringing more and more fans, right? And so you take that in combination with their hockey is for everyone. They should be the front runner for things like this, and that's on the downside of thinking it because then you're drawing into the conversation of, okay, well, you're just doing it for revenue and views and yada yada yada. But like if you're always if the league as a whole, if their philosophy is how to bring in new faces to the sport, you have to think that things like this, that movements like this, that times like these are when you can actually put your money where your mouth is, where you can actually stand by for what you say and do something about it. The fact that there was ever a sports article that was titled, David Schultz wrote this, the title of the blog of the article was, "Is the NHL tough enough on racism?" You are losing the battle. If you have anyone ever write something about you that has that title, is the NHL tough enough on racism? The NHL has lost. The NHL is continuing to lose, and nothing will change unless they actually start to do things about it, and not just the documentaries, not just positive words of affirmation. They need to say Black Lives Matter. They need to say the names of the people who have lost their lives to police brutality and social injustice. They need to start, emphasizing and growing the Black voices, the Black faces. They need to start bringing more Black voices and faces into their buildings, into their management, both male, female, non-binary, queer. They need to start doing more of this.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we're actually going to take what they're saying as seriously.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And I mean, I love both of your guys' points. Like, you guys have hit everything on the head. And I love the discussion we have here. And I have to ask, of course, like we've been talking about, how hockey has a diversity problem, but I got to ask the golden question of why is hockey the one sport that's a little more trailing behind the other sports, especially in terms of being susceptible to having a diversity problem. So why does hockey have this big diversity problem, and how bad has it really been?
I think it's definitely multifaceted. The first one, is no secret. Hockey's expensive, man. If you hockey is expensive,
100%.
if you want to get your kid into hockey, if you want to put in that investment, and because that's what it is, call a spade a spade. It's an investment. If you're putting your kid into hockey, you're paying for equipment, and not even just equipment. You're also paying for lessons, power, skating lessons, skills lessons. You're in camps. Summers, winters, all the time. You're in different leagues. Some of these leagues you have to pay for. It's money, man. Sticks are expensive. I worked at Canland Ice Sports a couple years back. It's expensive, man. So it's that. So on the one hand, it's that. Another thing is that if I'm a parent, right? I hope to be one in the future. But if I'm a parent and I'm watching and I'm paying attention to all these stories that are coming out of minor hockey, I do not put my kid anywhere near that. The fact that you have, I think Rick Westhead has been doing a lot of research on the amount of times minor league players have been suspended for saying racial slurs on the ice. I don't want to expose my kid to that. Wayne Simmons and Devontae Smith-Pelly, Akeem Aliu has said that when they were growing up in hockey, they had people in the stands calling them racial slurs when they're on the ice playing. And here's the thing, no one does anything about it. The coach doesn't say, hey, stop that. The other parents don't say, hey, stop that. The league doesn't say, hey, stop that. So 1, it's money. 2, it's safety, protection. You're not protected if you're a minority growing up in hockey. You're not. And then what's the next step? You turn on the TV, and then what do you see? You see the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
White star, white star, white star, white star. And the one black player you do see is either a goon or called a toxic player. Jerome McGinley was so shocking to me growing up as a kid, because I turn on hockey. I'm watching a Leafs game. I see it, Leafs in Calgary, and I see a black player who is not a goon, who's not on the fourth line, who's not there just to throw hits and drop his gloves in fights, who was a captain of his team and who was the best player on his team. That blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's things like that. So it's expensive, it's not safe, and you're not represented enough to even have an interest in hockey. That's the thing. As a kid, there's not even enough representation for you to even be interested in the sport. Because why am I going to watch this sport if everyone looks the same and I can't relate to anyone? I can't look.
For me, that's the kicker right there. If there's a challenge in diversity in hockey has perpetuated that. Because everything I know about the history of hockey starts with Indigenous people and players and Black players in Canada. And the way the game is known, that comes from Black communities, church leagues, and the Indigenous communities, and the technology that obviously has evolved over time. So I hear a lot of what you're saying, and I think those are things, again, that we also perpetuate in society outside of sport to say, oh, well, this is just how Black people are. This is just how Indigenous communities are. This is how Latinx communities are. And we haven't even talked about that there is an active player on the Maple Leafs who I had no idea had Mexican roots until maybe a month ago. And I consider myself plugged in. So hockey has a diversity problem, and it goes to hockey not embracing its full culture and hockey embracing the culture that hockey wants to embrace. And that comes from, and I know that Kim Davis and others have said, or have been asked, is hockey racist? Is it a racist sport? And the answer is yes, because hockey was built upon the same principles that we have in our politics, for example, and in our, our democracies, which was built on the superiority of one particular group, white men. So yeah, hockey does have a problem, and that's why everywhere else has a problem as well, because it was decided and perpetuated that white men have access, and because it's other white men seeing themselves, their colleagues and stuff, that creates a system that you don't have to necessarily be actively or openly, overtly racist, but racism is perpetuated because when we don't see color or see race, then we erase the fact that racism is a problem.
100%, and I completely agree with both of you guys' points, and Erica, especially your point that specifically, we do know that the history of the colored hockey league in the Maritimes was one of the the founding leagues of the sport of hockey, and that's just how the sport of hockey, the history of it dates back to, and how you said primarily like white men have taken over the sport and taken away from people of color and indigenous communities and black communities. It's very true, and it ties right into Omar's point about the socioeconomic factors that play into how hockey has evolved into a kind of an arena that is really just open to primarily white bodies, and that's the whole, for me, of course, that's the big reason why it has a diversity problem, is that it's just become, one, unattractive to people of color for a number of reasons, and two, because it's just inaccessible for people of color and people in those communities to try and get into the sport. It's very, very hard to even get into it.
And here's here's just another thing, just to cut in, Matthew, on Erica's point on diversity. The NHL, I don't think it was last year, I want to say it was the year before, the NHL had a little special ahead of Hockey Night in Canada, and it's February, so you're talking about Black History Month. And who do they have on TV talking about Black History Month? Elias Pettersson.
I think that has a lot to say about,
That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
That has a lot to say about.
I saw that and my jaw dropped. So,
I want to jump in because you guys are bringing great points, and I was just really thinking about the indigenous problem as well. Like, we do see such a big lack of diversity in the sport of hockey, even if people will argue, oh, well, everyone's from European countries and like these other places. Yeah, they look the same, but they're from different countries. That's not the point. We rarely see players like Ethan Bear, who I'm happy to say is doing has his name on the back of his jersey in his native Cree language. And Kyler Yamamoto, I think, almost wanted to do the same thing, but it didn't actually happen. Or how about the fact that Quinton Byfield could potentially be a first overall pick, or at worst, a top 3 pick in this year's draft? Yes, these are encouraging signs that there is going to be some progress. But as you guys have been saying, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I guess I want to ask you guys, how can the league and the players themselves do to effectively show their support?
I mean, there's not, and here's the thing, right? Is like the NHL feels like there's like a certain list of things that they have to do, right? And obviously there are things that would be nice for them to do, but it's just point blank. If you're gonna say that you support Black Lives Matter, then support Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. And whatever that means in the context of when you're having said conversation, just do it. And on the reverse, if you're not gonna support it, then stop saying you are gonna support it. Because all you're doing is you're just pushing back more of the voices that you're saying that you want to grow and that you wanna help improve. that you want to help us to see a better side of the story. So if you're going to support it, then support it. Whether it's kneeling, whether it's raising a fist, whether it's having speeches ahead of games, whether it's getting players to, I don't know, make a podcast or something and literally talk about what's going on.
Yeah.
Whether it's, hey, maybe it's picking up the phone and, texting Emmanuel Acho and say, hey, you've been doing a great series, Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man. Can we go onto your show and have a conversation with you? Whether it's something like that. By the way, if whoever's listening to this, that it's an amazing web series. Watch it. It's if you're someone who has no idea what's going on and wants to learn and doesn't know where to start, and you don't know where the resources are too, but actually, that's kind of stupid to say because we live in the world of internet. So if you don't want to go down that, literally his web series has been amazing. PK Subban was on episode 4, I believe. They had the episode was revolved around interracial relationships and how they've been treated and how they react to that in society. It's an amazing time. So whether it's where there's something like that, whether it's making donations, whether it's actually going out to these communities and speaking to different people, whether it's calling up Teddy. I don't know if you guys seen Teddy on Twitter. He's he's doing all these sick cocky tricks. He'll take his stick and he'll elevate it and he'll hit another stick. He's an amazing kid. Whether it's visiting him or something, or just show that you're actually willing to support it, and then it's not just going to be words. Whether it's maybe you're joining protests, maybe you're joining other movements. Just show that you actually want to support it and do it. That's it. Just do it.
Exactly.
Sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to make a joke.
Just quickly off your point, Omar. I mean, great answer. I was just gonna say, you kind of answered another question we had, but I did want to kind of on that note of the question we were gonna ask. Obviously, there are people who in the hockey community who feel standing for the anthem is something that they respect the flag and everything it represents, and of course some people don't feel like they want to kneel, but they feel like they want to support the BLM movement in another way. Would you say that all those things are something that someone who doesn't want to kneel can still do exactly in that way? What would you say to those people who still want to support the movement but just don't feel right standing? I mean, kneeling.
Yeah, I think that what I would personally say is that I respect that you're asking these questions, but I think there's more work to do if still there's a misunderstanding of kneeling and what it means. That's what I would say. But I would also say to anyone that supports the movement for Black Lives and supports having conversations about racism, I would also people to raise your standards. And yes, the United States national anthem in its entirety and has a racist history because America has a racist history. And so I think that there are definitely ways to have that conversation, but to demand that someone kneel or to demand that someone stand, I think both sides are missing the massive point, which is first that, or the land of the free, literally in the Constitution, that we have freedom of speech, but also that kneeling is we're sub-zero at that point for me, because if you're not saying Black Lives Matter, then that's all that really matters. And kneeling or putting a fist up right now doesn't mean the same thing that it meant when women were the only ones doing it, or when Colin Kaepernick was the only one doing it. So you don't have to kneel to understand Black Lives Matter and to be supportive of Black Lives Matter. But if you only kneel to support Black Lives Matter, that's a problem.
100%. I'm exactly with you there, Erica. Of course, I would really love to see more players kneel, and you know, it's just such a it's a very powerful and important you know, it's kind of like the basis right now to get to show support. But of course, as you said, I definitely want to see them also do more to support the movement and to show action, of course. But yeah, I mean, and back to Omar's point, all those things, Omar, that you kind of listed there is also great suggestions, and we hope, I mean, I don't know if any players would ever listen to this, but like there's really no excuse to not take action where action's due. There are a lot of different ways to take action and support the movement.
Absolutely. I guess maybe what I want to talk about is just from what we were talking about earlier, seeing players like Matt Dumba, Tyler Seguin, Ryan Reeves, and Robin Lehner, of all people, taking a knee. What was it, last week? I can't really remember the exact date. I want to say we saw that, and that was definitely inspiring. And also the thing with Kadri and the Minnesota Wild. Does that give you hope for the sport's future? Why or why not?
I think it's interesting. It was Monday, and I remember because I was actually talking to a hockey player about a lot of what we've talked about on this podcast. And we had just gotten off the phone, and then I sent a message to them. I was like, well, look, we were just talking about this. I think that, and it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, my frustration with kneeling comes from knowing about all of this my whole life and believing that people can absolutely kneel and do nothing to promote the movement for Black lives. But I understand why a lot of people believe that the hockey world needs this. And it's a tough place for me personally to be in, but I think that what I hope players, the players who took a knee on Monday, what I hope they can do, again, goes back to bringing that conversation, using that moment to have a conversation. And the reality is that when white players begin to do things publicly that are undeniable, like taking a knee, like wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, that is going to move the needle of the conversation. And so what I would say is that if hockey wants to be serious, that they need to listen to Black people, but they also need to ask white players in particular about these issues and to bring them into the conversation. I'm not expecting any hockey player necessarily, because hockey doesn't have a history of this, to be an expert, but I would love to see the conversation truly be that, a conversation, and not asking a white player for expertise. But I would love to know from hockey players more regularly, what they make of everything that's happening. White players.
Yeah.
What they're going to do about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To connect off that, for me, and I'm someone I'm more inclined with the hockey world. So, at the same time, I'm also Black. So I am also aware and have witnessed and experienced firsthand of what being Black means in society. My expectations were very low about players actually doing anything besides their statements. So when I saw pictures of like Sagan and Chara like at Black Lives Matter protests, it was, I don't want to say overwhelming, but it was just extremely shocking. And I want to say I had the same reaction when I saw Sagan, Lehner, Dickinson, and actually no, just those three kneeling, because Ryan Reeves is someone who like I was, it's really sad. I was having these conversations before the games even started. I'm like, if anyone is going to actually do something, it's probably going to be the black players, because this directly affects them. It directly affects all of us. And they're probably going to be the only ones who feel, I'm doing air quotes here, comfortable, because the NHL like to throw that word around when it comes to these movements, who feel comfortable with doing something because it directly affects them. That's the main difference between the racialized hockey players and the white players, is that racialized players, this is their life, this is their everyday. Whereas for the white hockey players, they can choose whether they want to engage with this or not. Hey, okay, I want to follow Black Lives Matter for a day. Okay, I'll do that. But if I don't, okay, I can't. But for players like Matt Dumba, Evander Kane, Wayne Simmons, and stuff, that's them, that's us, that's what we have to experience all the time. So seeing Seguin, Dickinson, and Leonard Neal, for me again was kind of like an overwhelming shock, because I didn't actually think it would happen, especially for Leonard, considering his past, which he has said that he's moved past from, but still it's still shocking to see. And that was just an action that we just needed to see. Players were saying that they supported, were saying that they want to take the time to learn and educate and do something about it, and they did. Right. Now you can think of you can think down the lines of, were they doing it because they support Black Lives Matter, or were they doing it because they wanted to support Ryan Reeves supporting Black Lives Matter? That's that's a different conversation. But at the bare minimum, they did it. But to Erica's point, what does this mean now? Are you taking further actions from this kneel to do more, or was the kneel just your flag? Hey, I did it, and now I'm fine. So I think that's what's important, and that's what the moving step is. Because if that's what it was, if it was just one thing that you wanted to do in the moment, and you're not going to change your lifestyle, you're not going to change how you think, to what Erica said, if you're not going to change what your standards are in how you read things and how you see other people reacting to said things, then we have a problem. So are Seguin, Dickinson, and Robin Leonard, are they going to call out racist acts? Are they going to stand out against police brutality? Are they going to contact the Hockey Diversity Alliance and say, what can we do to help? Or are they going to be doing things like that? Are they going to be, talking to coaches, talking to their respective management groups and saying, hey, this is a problem. We need to do more. We need to do more to support this. Are those things happening? So that's what I kind of need to see now. So for me, it was great to see them kneel. It was great to see a little bit of action, but this little bit of action can't just be a check. It needs to be more. It needs to evolve into an everyday lifestyle where you believe that Black Lives Matter, and that you're actually going to put in the work to make sure that the rest of the world, the rest of your circles and their circles and the hockey circles believe that Black Lives Matter. Because if you're not, then it all goes to waste.
And I think that's an important point, Omar, that you made, about the circles. Another thing that has to change, if you're serious about this conversation and moving the needle, is you have to change your circle hockey. Because again, the biggest challenge is hockey itself, is the culture that's perpetuated in hockey, is the people that are allowed to remain in hockey despite, again, penalty after penalty after penalty. So to quote Renee Hess of Black Girl Hockey Club, top of her list and top of my list as well, is hire Black women.
Yep.
Exactly.
Hire Black women. Because I bet you a Black woman, a woman in general of color or Indigenous woman, but particularly a Black woman, because of the intersex of her life, her literal life in this conversation, will be able to provided a lens that's much needed for hockey right now. And there are not enough Black voices, again, being heard, and there are not enough Black people and leaders in decision-making roles.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And sorry, and that just ties in, Erica, to Matthew, your earlier question about why don't you see you know, a lot of diversity in hockey growing up?
Of course,
you know, Black people in positions of power in minor hockey, that's going to be huge. You don't see Black coaches in hockey, and if you do, their integrity and their intelligence to the game is questioned. I forgot when I saw it, and I forgot where I saw it, but I remember seeing it. There was a group chat with parents and players, and one father was texting a Black coach saying that he didn't feel that he was good enough to coach the team because he probably knew more about basketball than hockey.
Terrible.
So that's what needs to change. You need to have you know, Black people, Black women in positions of power within that sport to be able to read through the lines and to be able to help enforce these things. So definitely,
absolutely great points from both you guys. And I mean, we're starting to close out the interview here, but I do have a few more questions just off of the point that you guys were just making. Of course, and I really loved both of your points about the, you know, expanding your circles, because I definitely want to see it does start in the hockey circle, because we definitely want to see this change, that even this small nugget of change and action kind of spread to the other players and across the league. But obviously one of the barriers and factors, and we kind of talked about in our previous one of our previous questions, was obviously the socioeconomic factors that play into hockey. Often has that kind of separation of privilege. We do see a lot of people make the argument, you know, or we just know that, you know, hockey players often think if it doesn't have to do, you know, directly deal with them, that, you know, they don't have to speak on it or take action against it, you know. But my question essentially is, what do you think then we can do to try and make these often privileged athletes realize the fact that there is racism that needs to be eradicated? I mean, just like that, I mean, you guys spoke about, you know, working within your circles, but how else do you think, you know, that can be achieved?
I mean, again, I really don't know that there's much else that Black people can say. It's documented. Even my story is documented, which is wild. But you know, I think when we have conversations about race and racism, everyone's always looking to those with more melanin, as I like to say, to, you know, describe some of the worst experiences that they've ever had. And that hasn't changed anyone's opinion yet on racism, so why should I continue?
Exactly.
I want to know why you believe there's not racism. I want to know why you think it's okay to have a league with you know, a mouthpiece like Don Cherry at the time. You know,
oh my God.
Riddle me that. Explain that to me, because the logic, I think, on one side is much stronger than the other.
100%. I completely agree with that, especially, I mean, of course, even me being a brown man, and often in hockey circles, it's often like, you know, people of color often have to explain their experiences to just try and, you know, sway people in those positions of privilege to, you know, sway their opinion, when it should be exactly how you said, Erica. Why did they feel like racism doesn't exist? It's all about challenging those ideas, rather than, you know, just kind of expressing, you know, the one side.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that's why it's really important that we're starting to see more reporters asking players why they aren't kneeling or what they're doing to show their support, and then just reading the answers. First off, they're it's the pinnacle of hockey cliche. It's like you're reading the answer, and it's like they're talking about like breaking down a play, like, oh, what happened at the end of the second period to give up a lead or something, and it's just like you're reading it, and it's like, okay, so you don't get it then. And that's just flat out. So I think that's something that needs to continue to happen, is that more NHL reporters need to continue asking players why they aren't doing things. And to Erica's point, if it happens, it would be wicked if someone says, just ask a player what are their thoughts on racism, just flat out. What are your thoughts on police brutality in America, in Canada? What are your thoughts on that? Because then you can't do the whole rigmarole. Oh, well, we think it's a powerful thing, and obviously we want to support him and do whatever we can, but you know what I mean. Like we can't get that. Just ask them flat out, what are your thoughts on racism?
Exactly.
And then move on from there. Because if you don't have any thoughts on racism, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Straight up. Because it's literally there, just like what Erica said. It's just like what you were saying, Matt. It's there. It's around. It's like when you're watching a horror movie and the butler obviously did it, and everyone was like, "No, it wasn't the butler," and then the butler ends up killing you, and you're like, "Oh man, it was the butler." Like it's literally, and I'm not trying to like downgrade the conversation, but like that's literally what it is. Like it's in front of you, so there's no reason to believe that it does not exist. And if you do believe that it doesn't exist, then we have a problem. And then you need to start educating yourself. And then you need to start changing your circles and actually start putting some meaning behind the things that you're saying.
100%. It's definitely just about, it's really about educating, being able to educate yourself and educating others. Like you said, like it's there, like it's always been there. Racism always been there. And I think that kind of leads into my next question is just, we've been talking about the inaccessibility of sport of hockey to people of color, and I was just gonna ask you, again, we've been spending all podcast trying to come up with an answer to this, but there's not really a lot of hard answer for this. But how can we make hockey more accessible to people of color? And I just want to say, like, through our podcast, me and Michael, we've been holding the idea that it definitely starts young, and it starts in those dressing rooms. I mean, me as a brown man, as a South Asian kid growing up playing hockey, it's so easy, even in hockey circles with your friends who are primarily Caucasian, it's very easy to feel out of place, and you don't fit in, and definitely even more in the dressing rooms. And it goes from playing, but also to spectators in those same circles. And I think it's just about, for me, I think a big thing is making sure that the younger generation is learning, again, educating themselves on what's going on right now, so that when they grow into the league and when they grow into adults, hopefully they're the ones who are already kind of they've already learned this new culture, and they're trying to put this new culture at play.
I think what I would say is that Willie O'Ree was the first, but why is it that we don't know who the latest Black player was in the league? And then all of the Black players in between. There needs to be more celebrating all of hockey's history, not just the history that hockey wants to promote. I think that's just kind of been a theme here for us, because you don't have hockey without the Indigenous community. You don't have hockey without the Black community. And
Exactly.
if you're a fan of international hockey, then you don't have winning hockey without women. So especially over here on this side of the border. There's just so much that we can celebrate in hockey. To a point that was made earlier, the NHL in particular seems to like to look for the next fan. But they don't need to look that far. Because there's so many communities that love hockey, but they're not going to love the NHL if the NHL doesn't acknowledge their existence and celebrate who they are, just as they do all of the other players that fit into the cookie cut of the NHL. So I think it really has to be about education, celebrating that history, and it doesn't stop. You don't, racism, the way it's set up in the world through white supremacy and imperialism, it doesn't stop because it wasn't meant to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't stop, and we never stop uplifting the indigenous community, uplifting women, uplifting Black and brown players, uplifting communities who are hockey loving that might not ever skate on the ice because that they're not able-bodied, or they are deaf or hard of hearing or are blind. There's so many, different ways that hockey is not utilizing the resources that they have to expand, or the NHL is not expanding their horizons to look to all of the people that actually love hockey, because it's a beautiful game, but it won't be a beautiful culture if those in charge, and a lot of people do see the NHL as driving hockey culture, modern hockey culture, we're not going to survive if they don't tap into people who are already hockey loving people.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think to your point, Matthew, and also to what you were saying before, Erica, I think those conversations, even before they get into the locker room, I think they need to start in the home.
100%.
Right? Because if you're teaching your kids, right from the get-go of the importance of loving people, of loving all, the hardships of what different groups go through, and acknowledging the fact that because of what you look like, you will have a certain privilege over someone else. Those conversations need to happen, because when you're teaching your kids at that young of an age, and they perpetuate those ideas, then they can go on to teach other people. Not saying it's their job, but they can make those decisions of who they choose to hang out with and who they choose to not hang out with. And then you can kind of see that grow within hockey culture, because it's all perpetuated by the same people. The kids play the game, they grow up, their kids play the game, they grow up, their kids play the game, they grow up. So at some point you need to start teaching, you have to break that cycle. You have to break that cycle that hockey is only for one type of person. And even though hockey doesn't say it is, hockey shows that it is.
Yes.
So even though, of course we all want the NHL to do better. We all want the NHL to do better. And that's one thing that has to change for them. And that, Erica, this is what you said. Just because you love hockey doesn't mean you have to love the NHL. So the NHL, they need to focus on bettering themselves as a league to make themselves true to what they say, and hockey is for everyone. Now, the parents who are raising kids in today's society, you need to show your kids the importance of being a good human being, and that people don't need to be treated differently because of how they look, and that if a person is killed in the streets because of how they look, it's wrong. If someone wants to stand up and fight against that, it's okay, and that you should also be helping to aid to that fight and not be a deterrent to that fight, because that's where it starts. We're talking about sports, but we're also talking about human rights here. And that's why the whole keep politics out of sports line is ridiculous, because we're not talking about politics. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about the lives of these people who are being mistreated, who are being killed because of what they look like.
Right.
So that's where it needs to start for me.
Absolutely agree. And thank you, everyone, for Erica and Omar, for just bringing up such valuable points. You guys may have noticed that I've been really not saying much, and it's not because I don't have anything to say. I want to use this opportunity to listen and to understand where you guys are coming from and how the league can improve. And I think this is where I want to take this last question, because I'm an ally. I would consider myself an ally. And I feel like, as there's a lot of fans who watch hockey that want to be supporting this movement. But as you guys have said, it starts young. And it's not just hockey players that have to be learned how to be better people. It's the fans as well, because they too represent the sport and the league. So I guess I want to say to the listeners at home that want to be better allies, what would you tell them how they can be better allies?
First, start by saying Black Lives Matter. Just say that. That's the first step. And then if you can say that, it fits, it sits well with you, it felt good rolling off of your tongue, and you really believe it, and work to gain more understanding of what you can do to actualize that. And the reason I say it that way is because there are policies that I want to see change. There are organizations that I want to see people support. But what's more important is for people to take the step of learning for themselves. Because I can tell you my experiences, I can tell you where I put my money, I can tell you what I do. But I don't need you to do what I do. I need you to do other things so that you, again, are expanding that community, that you're expanding the outreach, that you are making sure that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're talking about things like qualified immunity, but we're also talking about how attorney generals and prosecutors are either voted or appointed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I need you to do your homework and to come with your resources and aces in places. Then you find your space in this movement to help me in my path. And my path is right now talking to athletes from all backgrounds about racism. That's my path. But I need you to show up and do your part, because we need everything covered. Not just one thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. Erica, honestly, I think you said that perfectly. It is not much to add, but I think one thing that is important definitely is to hold yourself accountable and to hold other people that you consider close to you accountable as well. I've heard so many stories of meeting someone and then seeing the way they speak, and then like you get, say for example, like after school, you see the parent, you see like an uncle or something, and you hear the way they speak, and it's like, okay, so it's not just a pick and choose type of thing. If you want to support all of this as it's happening, you need to continue to acknowledge what's happening. You need to do your own homework, not rely on your friendly neighborhood Black person to educate you. You need to, if say for example, if you're having a family dinner and Uncle Steve says something racist, don't just laugh. Don't just do that whole awkward, like, oh my God, that was so racist.
Yeah.
Don't just do that. Just be like, hey, Uncle Steve, that was racist. And this is why. And that's the important thing. That was racist and this is why. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. It could be an explanation, but it's not an excuse. And this is another line from Emmanuel Acho. He said it on his radio show. It's not an excuse anymore. We live in a time where information is available to us. We just need to go out and get the information, and then do something with that information. So whether it is calling out someone when they're being racist, whether it is finding out when the next Black Lives Matter protest is, whether it is donating, whether it's joining some type of group to come together and figure out how you're going to change things within your respective communities, within your respective neighborhoods, whether it's something like that. That's what it comes down to. And I'm not saying go on social media and then start attacking people left and right, but it just comes down to saying Black Lives Matter, believing Black Lives Matter, and then actually putting your words where your mouth is and doing things to show that you believe that Black Lives Matter.
Yep. Black Lives Matter. And listen, to the listeners at home, please let's really take to heart what Erica and Omar have been saying today, because they've been saying a lot, and they've been saying very important stuff and very impactful stuff. And I think what they're saying is critical, because we need to have uplift voices such as them, because there's a lot of other people like them that do have a voice to say in this fight, and they need to be uplifted. So I really hope you do take into account what they've been saying, and realize that yes, we would love to see players take part in protesting and showing their support for Black Lives Matter, but we as fans can also make a difference in this fight as well.
Yeah.
Don't look for players to make a stand and think, oh, now I can do it because they did it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can make a difference too. And if you make that stand and just show your support in all the ways I've been talking about on this podcast, you're making just as much of a difference as what a player would do if they're showing their support, like a LeBron James or like any player in the WNBA or anyone.
For sure. And with that, so first, I mean, we want to thank you both for coming on. An amazing discussion, and we really hope that this can be used as an educational tool for a lot of people, especially in the hockey community or just in the sports community in general, to learn more about the issues that are at hand here, and learn that everyone needs to take action in their own ways, because we need to start promoting anti-racism and fighting against injustices. But before we go, are there any resources that you guys want to shout out that can be helpful for listeners? I quickly want to shout out, of course, Black Girl Hockey Club. They've been great in this entire fight for equality, especially in the hockey arena, in the hockey community. So great. I definitely recommend checking them out and giving them a follow on Twitter as well, and donating to them as well.
You said it there. I've worked alongside Black Girl Hockey Club in a lot of things. And I mentioned that I'm doing a social justice series. It started as social justice in women's hockey. And I'm committed to talking to hockey players about racism, but a lot of other things. Also, I mentioned ableism on this podcast, sexism. There are so many things that the hockey community needs to be more comfortable talking about, because not only do they impact hockey fans, but they impact hockey players, hockey coaches, owners. Maybe just not it's just not something that, again, hockey is embracing. So check that out over at on my YouTube channel. And I think, I mentioned Soul on Ice, and I'm so glad that Kwame Mason does have a regular space on an NHL platform. I think that that's great, because I know the work that Kwame is doing, but I want the NHL to do more of that and to find more Black voices. But you can't go wrong, listening to Kwame and the guys talk about hockey. And, again, just having Black people is not enough if you're not celebrating them. And I know that Kwame Mason knows how to celebrate Black and brown players and our history in hockey.
Yeah, I'd say definitely everything that was suggested earlier, for sure. Saw an account and a site that I've been reading a lot is The Color of Hockey. So their site, that's definitely worth a follow. Their site, for hockey fans and players of color. They show all these stories that the NHL should be showing, but they're not. So you see teams in Africa. I believe there's a Black coach in London right now who's preparing his team for a tournament. So you get to read all those type of stories. So I definitely would go to them. And honestly, go out, Google, if you're someone who wants to to be an ally, who wants to learn more. Literally go out and Google. There are countless works and histories and all type of stuff. Educate yourself. Don't rely on other people to do it for you. And the means are there. You just have to open the book.
Yep,
100%.
Exactly.
And I also just before we close, I also just, for general, a good resource for general, to educate yourself is Black Black Lives Matters with an S at the end .carrd.co. That's a great resource just for there's a lot of resources on there, and just to educate yourself, there's a ton of resources there to help out. But I wanted to say thank you both for coming on to the podcast, and honestly, I love the discussion we have. Every single point that's been made on this podcast has been so insightful, and I really do hope that a lot of people can benefit from listening to the discussion we had today.
Yeah, thanks again to all of you for such a great conversation, and it's good to be on the show again.
Of course.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's been a blast. It's always a blast talking with you guys. Erica, again, it was great to have this conversation with you firsthand. It was awesome, and yeah, hopefully this gets out, people listen to it, and spread it around.
Hopefully, so for sure. Before we guys let you go, why don't you plug in your socials so people know where to find your work?
Sure, you can find me on all social media at elindsay08. That's ELINDSAY 08, and it's got links to all of my other stuff.
As for me, I'm mostly just on Twitter at TicTacTOmar. I do GIFs, hockey stuff, tweet a lot about hockey stuff. Also, I write at Pension Plan Puppets. I probably should say that first. But you mostly find me on Twitter there.
Of course.
Awesome. So once again, thank you guys so much for coming on. I love this discussion so much, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks again.
You too.
Well, what can I say? That was an excellent discussion. I really enjoyed that. Matthew, would you agree with me on that?
Of course, 100%. Just such an insightful episode. And, we need to keep this conversation going. We need to keep our attention and our focus on these issues at hand and how we can work towards, anti-racism and racial equality and the fight against injustices every day and racism. We definitely have to keep talking about it and keep doing what we can to help out. And I just want to thank Erica and Omar again for coming onto the show. It was amazing having you guys if you guys are listening right now. But thank you for coming on. And I think we'll close out this episode with that, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. First of all, thanks again to Omar and Erica for taking the time to come on and for them using giving them a platform to be able to express the importance of supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in sports. Mm-hmm. But yes, there's going to be no NBA draft redo this week, and actually, we are going to be taking a week off this coming week because I'm going to the cottage.
Nice, and it's definitely a time to relax and recharge. We will be back with sports content. Definitely sports will be even more underway by then. But yes, we will be taking a break. So we'll be back in 2 weeks, everyone.
Yes,
but
of course.
With that, we're just going to close out the episode. You can follow me on Twitter, tweet, message me, give us feedback, ask us questions, whatever, on my Twitter, at Matt_Rodrigo_.
And you can follow me on Twitter at the Leafs IMO. And as always, you can find mine and Matthew's work at the Leafs Nation.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick bit of news, super quick. We also opened up both a YouTube page and a Twitter page for this podcast. On Twitter, it is at Behind the Net Pod. And on YouTube, you can find us just by searching up Behind the Net Podcast. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. And once again, thank you for listening, and we hope you have a great week.
See you guys.